15 years. That's a lifetime, isn't it? 15 years of shared jokes, inside-out socks left on the floor, and the quiet comfort of knowing someone has your back, always. For our 15th anniversary, I was expecting Mark's usual gift. A thoughtful, slightly nerdy first edition book or a framed antique map of a place we once visited. He was a history professor, and his love for the past was as much a part of him as the silver streaks in his hair. But that night, as we sat by the crackling fire, the glow warming our faces, he handed me a sleek modern box. It felt too light to be a book. "All right," I said, swirling the red wine in my glass. "You've got my attention. What is it this time? Another piece of history I'm not allowed to touch?" He had this smile, a slow, genuine curve of his lips that still made my heart skip a beat after all these years. "Better," he said. "This is for us, for our family. It's about our past and our future." I peeled back the wrapping paper. Inside were 3 elegant, minimalist boxes from one of those popular DNA companies. Know Your Roots. I couldn't help but laugh. It was so trendy, so unlike my history-loving husband. DNA tests? Seriously, Mark, we know where we come from. You're from Ohio farm country, I'm a California girl. Not exactly a global mystery waiting to be solved. "Just humor me," he pleaded, his eyes sparkling with an excitement I found infectious. "I've been deep diving into my family tree online, tracing the Collins line back to the 1800s, and I hit a wall. I thought, wouldn't it be cool for Leo to see his whole genetic map? The blend of us, the West Coast, and the Midwest coming together. It's a family project." Just then, our son, Leo, thundered into the room. At 12, he was a perfect storm of gangly limbs, boundless energy, and a curiosity that mirrored his father's. "Is that a present for me too?" he asked, his eyes wide. "It's for all of us, buddy," Mark said, ruffling his hair. "We're gonna find out if we have any Viking blood." Leo's face lit up. Vikings. Of course, that was the magic word. He was obsessed with Norse mythology. I looked at my 2 boys, their faces glowing with anticipation, and my skepticism melted away. This wasn't about ancestry for them, it was about adventure. It was about us. "Okay, Vikings," I conceded with a warm sigh. "You got me. Let's do it." The process itself was mundane. Spitting into a tube felt more like a science experiment than unlocking ancient secrets. We sealed our little vials, dropped them in the mail, and for a while we forgot all about it. Life went on. Soccer practice, parent-teacher conferences, arguments over screen time, the comfortable, chaotic rhythm of our little world. 6 weeks later, I was standing in the kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the window, waiting for the coffee to brew. My phone buzzed on the counter. An email. The subject line read, "Your DNA results are in." A smile touched my lips. I poured my coffee, added a splash of cream, and sat down at the kitchen table, pulling my laptop towards me. I clicked the link and the family portal opened. It was a sleek interface, all clean lines and friendly graphics. I looked at my own results first. 99.8% European. No surprises there. I scrolled through the breakdown of regions, a predictable mix of English, Irish, and a little bit of French. Then I clicked on Mark's. A similar story, mostly German and Scottish. Then I saw the tab. Family connections. This was the part Mark was so excited about. I clicked it, and a diagram appeared. It showed my icon linked to Mark's with a line that said, "Husband." So far, so good. Then, below us, was Leo. A line connected my icon to his. I hovered over it, expecting it to say, "Mother." But my eyes were drawn to the other line, the one connecting Mark to Leo. It was a dotted line, not solid like mine. And next to it was a small, angry-looking red exclamation mark. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. I clicked on it. A text box popped up. The words were clinical, detached, and they felt like a punch to the gut. Based on the DNA provided, Mark Collins and Leo Collins do not share enough identical DNA to be parent and child. 0% DNA match. This person is not your biological child. I read the words once, twice, 3 times. The coffee cup trembled in my hand. It was a mistake. It had to be a lab error, a glitch in the system. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. I thought of the day Leo was born, the sterile smell of the hospital, the exhaustion, the overwhelming wave of love when they placed him in my arms. I remembered Mark, his face pale with awe and terror, cutting the umbilical cord with a shaky hand. He was there. We were both there. The sound of the front door opening made me jump. Mark was home from the university, earlier than usual. "Hey," he called out cheerfully. "Smells like coffee. Anything interesting in the mail?" I couldn't form words. My throat was tight, my body frozen. I just slowly, silently, turned the laptop screen towards him. His smile faltered as he walked closer. He squinted at the screen, his head tilting in confusion. Then his expression shifted. The confusion morphed into disbelief, and then into something cold and sharp. A deep, profound hurt that twisted his features. "Vera, what is this?" His voice was low, barely a whisper, but it vibrated with a terrifying tension. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" "It has to be a mistake, Mark," I stammered, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "A lab error. It's impossible." He shook his head slowly, his gaze locked on the screen. "I've read about these things," he said, his voice gaining a hard edge. "These tests, they don't make mistakes like this. They're 99.99% accurate." He finally looked at me, and his eyes weren't the warm, loving eyes I'd known for 15 years. They were the eyes of a stranger, filled with suspicion and a dawning, unbearable pain. "For 15 years, Vera, have you been lying to me?" The accusation hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen out of the room. It struck me with the force of a physical blow. Tears I didn't know I was holding back began to stream down my face. "How can you even ask me that?" I cried. "How? Look at him. He has your father's walk. He has your terrible sense of humor. He even wrinkles his nose when he's thinking, just like you do." "Don't," he snapped, his voice cracking. "Just don't. Who is he, Vera? Just tell me the truth." Panic, pure and absolute, seized me. I had to prove it. I had to make this nightmare go away. Desperate, my hands shaking so violently I could barely control the trackpad, I grabbed the laptop. I needed to show him the proof, the undeniable link. I clicked back to the family diagram, my cursor hovering over the line connecting me and Leo. This would fix it. This would show him it was all a terrible system error. I clicked. I expected to see the words 50% match mother, but the screen showed the same dotted line, the same red exclamation mark, the same soul-destroying text box. Based on the DNA provided, Vera Collins and Leo Collins do not share enough identical DNA to be parent and child. 0% DNA match. This person is not your biological child. The world went silent. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, my own ragged breathing, it all vanished. There was only the screen, and the impossible words burning into my brain. Mark stared, his anger evaporating into a cloud of sheer, unadulterated shock. He looked from the screen to me, his mouth slightly agape. The days that followed were a blur of suffocating silence. Our cozy, vibrant home, once filled with laughter and the sound of Leo's video games, became a museum of a life we used to have. Mark and I moved around each other like ghosts, communicating only in clipped, necessary sentences. "Did you take out the trash? Leo has soccer at 4. I'm not hungry." The elephant in the room wasn't just an elephant. It was a herd of mammoths, stomping on the fragile remnants of our reality. The hardest part was pretending. When Leo came home from school, we had to force smiles onto our faces, ask about his day, and act like the two people who loved him most in the world hadn't just discovered they were strangers to him. Every time I looked at him, at the curve of his smile, the cowlick in his dark hair, the way he crunched his cereal, my heart would ache with a terrifying duality. A fierce, protective love that was as real as the air I breathed, and a cold, horrifying question: if he wasn't mine, then who was he? One evening, after Leo was in bed, I found Mark in his study, staring blankly at a wall of books he'd spent a lifetime collecting. He hadn't touched a single one since the results came in. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "This silence is killing us." He didn't turn around. "What do you want to talk about, Vera? The fact that our entire life is a lie? That the boy sleeping down the hall, the boy I taught to ride a bike and build a model airplane, isn't my son? That he isn't your son?" "He is our son," I insisted, tears welling up again. They were my constant companions now. "I don't care what some test in a lab says. I carried him. I felt him kick. I went through 22 hours of labor. That's real, Mark. What we have with him is real." He finally turned to face me, and his face was a portrait of exhaustion and despair. "I know, I feel it too, but that doesn't change the facts. There's another boy out there, Vera, a boy with your eyes and my crooked smile, living with strangers. And Leo, his biological parents are somewhere. Maybe they're looking for him. Maybe they've wondered about him every single day for 12 years. The thought was a physical pain, a sharp twisting in my gut. He was right. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about two families, torn apart by a mistake we never even knew had happened. Leo started noticing. "Are you guys fighting?" he asked one night at dinner, pushing his peas around his plate. "No, sweetie," I said, my voice unnaturally bright. "Just tired. Work has been busy." It was the first of many lies we'd have to tell him, and each one felt like a small betrayal. Almost a month after we'd hired him, Mr. Harrison called. I answered on the first ring, my hand shaking. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I have something. It's not a certainty, but it's a strong lead. I think you and your husband should come to my office." The drive to Mr. Harrison's office was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Mark's hands were clenched on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Everything depended on what was waiting for us in that cluttered, coffee-scented room. Mr. Harrison had a single manila folder sitting on his otherwise messy desk. It looked thin, insignificant, but I knew it held the power to either save us or destroy us completely. "Okay," he began, opening the folder. "I had a source pull the unofficial admission and discharge logs for the maternity ward on September 14th, 12 years ago. It was a busy day. 7 births. 4 girls, 3 boys. My heart hammered against my ribs. 3 boys. I started digging into the families of the other 2 boys. One family moved to Australia 8 years ago. The other family still lives about an hour north of here, a town called Maple Creek." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of a public record. "The Jennings, Sarah and Tom Jennings. They had a baby boy, Ryan Jennings, born at 11:42 p.m. on September 14th. Leo was born at 11:58 p.m. 16 minutes, a 16-minute window. But here's the kicker," Harrison continued, leaning forward. "I spoke with a retired nurse who worked that shift. She remembers that night clearly because there was a brief power outage around midnight. The backup generators kicked in, but for about 5 to 10 minutes, there was chaos. Nurses were using flashlights, manually checking monitors. It was a moment of vulnerability, a moment when a tired, overworked nurse could have made a mistake, a terrible, life-altering mistake." My hand flew to my mouth. It was real. This wasn't just a theory anymore. There was a time, a place, a reason. "I did some light social media recon," Harrison said, his voice softening. The Jennings are a public-facing family. Sarah Jennings is a real estate agent. Her profile is open. He reached into the folder and pulled out a photograph printed on glossy paper. He placed it on the desk between me and Mark. It was a family portrait, the kind people take for Christmas cards. A smiling man and woman stood on a porch, decorated with autumn pumpkins. Between them stood a 12-year-old boy. Leo started noticing. "Are you guys fighting?" he asked one night at dinner, pushing his peas around his plate. "No, sweetie," I said, my voice unnaturally bright. "Just tired, work has been busy." It was the first of many lies we'd have to tell him, and each one felt like a small betrayal. Almost a month after we'd hired him, Mr. Harrison called. I answered on the first ring, my hand shaking. "Mrs. Collins," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I have something. It's not a certainty, but it's a strong lead. I think you and your husband should come to my office." The drive to Mr. Harrison's office was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Mark's hands were clenched on the steering wheel, his knuckles white. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Everything depended on what was waiting for us in that cluttered, coffee-scented room. Mr. Harrison had a single manila folder sitting on his otherwise messy desk. It looked thin, insignificant, but I knew it held the power to either save us or destroy us completely. "Okay," he began, opening the folder. I had a source pull the unofficial ad. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. I felt dizzy, like the room was tilting. The boy was a ghost. He was the ghost of a child I'd imagined 1,000 times. He had my jawline, the same shape to my face that I saw in my own baby pictures. And his eyes? They were Mark's eyes. The same deep brown, the same slight almond shape. He even had Mark's crooked smile, the one that only showed up when he was genuinely happy. It was like looking at a phantom version of our own son. "That's him," I whispered, my voice choked with a sound that was half sob, half gasp. Mark just stared, his face ashen. He was completely silent, his breathing shallow. I could feel the violent conflict raging inside him as he looked at this photo of a stranger who was his own flesh and blood. Mr. Harrison gave us the address. We drove home in a daze, the photograph lying on the seat between us like a bomb. We didn't know what to do. Call them? Show up at their door? "Hello, we have your son and we believe you have ours?" The words were insane. For 2 days, we did nothing. We just existed, circling the photograph, circling each other, circling the unbearable truth. Finally, on a Saturday morning, Mark picked up his car keys. "I can't," he said, his voice raw. "I can't just sit here. I have to see him. Just see him." We drove for an hour, the GPS directing us to a quiet, tree-lined street in Maple Creek. It was the kind of idyllic suburban neighborhood you see in movies. Kids were riding bikes. People were mowing their lawns. We found the Jennings house. It was a lovely 2-story colonial with a basketball hoop in the driveway. And their car wasn't there. A knot of panic and relief tightened in my chest. But Mark had a look of grim determination. "Where would a family go on a Saturday morning?" he muttered, already driving slowly down the street. We found them a few blocks away at a sprawling community park. We parked across the street, partially hidden by a large oak tree. And we watched. There they were. Tom Jennings was throwing a football with Ryan, our son, our biological son. He ran and jumped, his laughter carrying across the field, a sound we'd never heard but felt like we'd known forever. He looked happy. He looked healthy. He looked so incredibly loved. I saw Sarah Jennings sitting on a picnic blanket, cheering him on. She looked kind. She clapped for him just like I clapped for Leo at his soccer games. She was a good mom. A wave of emotions so complex I couldn't name them washed over me. A searing jealousy, a profound relief, a deep, aching sadness, and a strange, unwelcome connection to this woman who had been raising my child. "He looks so happy," Mark said, his voice thick. "They seem like good people." "She's a good mom," I replied. the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I can tell. We sat there for what felt like an eternity. Two spies watching a life that should have been ours. A life that had been stolen from us by a simple, careless mistake in the dark. Finally, I turned to Mark, tears streaming down my face. "We have to tell them," I said. "They deserve to know the truth. Ryan deserves to know, and Leo deserves to know his whole story, no matter how hard it is to hear. We can't live this lie anymore." Mark nodded, his jaw set. He took a deep, shuddering breath. He put the car in drive, but he didn't drive away. He made a slow U-turn and drove across the street, parking right behind the Jennings minivan. He turned off the engine. For a moment, we just sat there, gathering the courage to detonate a bomb in the middle of this perfect Saturday afternoon. Then, together, we got out of the car. We started walking towards them, our steps feeling heavy, like we were wading through mud. Sarah Jennings turned at the sound of our approaching footsteps. She looked up, a curious, friendly smile on her face, completely and blissfully unaware that her world, just like mine, was about to end and begin all at once. Time seemed to slow down as we approached them. Every detail was magnified. The bright green of the grass, the scuff marks on Ryan's sneakers, the hopeful, questioning smile on Sarah Jennings's face. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice pleasant, a little cautious. Her husband, Tom, stopped throwing the football and looked over at us. My mouth was dry. My carefully rehearsed opening speech vanished from my mind. All I could do was stand there, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Mark stepped forward, his expression grave. "Are you Sarah and Tom Jennings?" he asked, his voice steady despite the tremor I knew he was feeling. "Yes," Tom said, walking closer. His brow was furrowed. "Is something wrong?" "Our names are Mark and Vera Collins," Mark said. "Something happened a long time ago, 12 years ago, at Northwood General Hospital. We believe there was a mistake." I watched Sarah's friendly smile curdle into confusion. "A mistake? What are you talking about?" I couldn't hold it in any longer. The words tumbled out of me in a desperate, broken whisper. "Our son was born on the same night as your son, September 14th. We did a DNA test. The boy we've raised, his name is Leo. He isn't biologically ours, and we have reason to believe we think our son went home with you." The silence that followed was absolute. The park, which had been filled with the sounds of children laughing and birds chirping, seemed to fall completely quiet. Tom and Sarah just stared at us, their faces blank with disbelief. Then, Tom let out a short, harsh laugh. "Is this a prank?" he said, looking around as if expecting to find a hidden camera. "Because it's not funny. You need to leave, now." "We're not leaving," I said, my voice gaining strength from the sheer terror of the situation. "This isn't a joke." I fumbled in my purse, my hands shaking, and pulled out the folded DNA reports and the photograph of Ryan. I held them out. "Please, just look." Sarah's eyes flickered down to the photo in my hand. She saw her son's face. Then she looked up, really looked at Mark. Her eyes widened. I saw the moment it happened. The flicker of recognition, the subconscious connection her brain made between the man standing in front of her and the boy she called her son. Her face went pale. "Tom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Look at him. Look at his eyes." Tom snatched the papers from my hand. He scanned the DNA reports, his face growing darker with every word he read. He looked from the paper to Mark, then to me, then back to the photo of Ryan. The anger on his face was replaced by a rising tide of panic and horror. "No," he muttered. "No, this is crazy. This is impossible." By now, Ryan had stopped playing and was walking towards us, a look of confusion on his face. "Mom, Dad, who are these people?" "Ryan, go wait by the car," Sarah said, her voice tight and strained. But it was too late. He was there, standing just a few feet away, looking from his parents' terrified faces to the two strangers who had shattered their afternoon. The next hour was a chaotic, tear-filled blur. We moved to a secluded picnic bench, away from prying eyes. We laid out the whole story: the DNA test, the hospital, the power outage, the private investigator. They listened, alternating between furious denial and horrified acceptance. Sarah wept silently, her hand covering her mouth, as she stared at Mark's face. Tom paced back and forth like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. And through it all, Ryan and I kept stealing glances at each other. He was looking at me, at the woman who shared his DNA with a mixture of fear and a strange, unnerving curiosity. And I was looking at him, the baby I never got to hold, the boy I never got to know, my heart breaking and swelling all at once. "So what do you want?" Tom finally demanded, his voice raw with anguish. "You expect us to just... what? Swap? You take our son and we take yours?" The word "swap" hung in the air like a poison. I looked at Ryan, this wonderful, happy boy who only knew Sarah and Tom as his parents. Then I thought of Leo, my sweet, funny Leo, at home, probably playing video games, completely unaware that his entire world was being dismantled. The thought of taking him from the only home he'd ever known and handing him over to strangers, it was unthinkable. It was monstrous. "No," I said, shaking my head vehemently. "Of course not. We can't. They're not packages. They're children. They're our sons." "He's our son," Sarah choked out, pulling Ryan protectively closer to her. The look in her eyes was fierce, a mother lion protecting her cub. It was the same look I knew I would have if anyone ever tried to take Leo from me. And that's when the full crushing weight of the situation landed on all of us. There was no easy solution. There was no going back to normal. Normal had been obliterated the moment I clicked on that email. We were 4 parents, 2 children, all victims of a random, catastrophic mistake, and we were trapped in an impossible nightmare with no clear way out. We exchanged phone numbers, our hands shaking. We agreed we needed to talk more, away from the kids. As we walked back to our car, I glanced back. I saw Sarah kneeling in front of Ryan, holding his face in her hands, trying to explain the unexplainable. Tom stood beside them, his shoulders slumped in defeat. They looked like a family that had just survived a car crash, and I realized, with a fresh wave of despair, that we were all in that same crash. We were all bleeding, all broken, and none of us knew how to even begin to stop the bleeding. The drive home was silent again, but this time it wasn't an angry silence. It was a silence of shared grief, of a problem so immense, so profound, that no words could possibly contain it. We had found the truth, and the truth was 1,000,000 times more painful than the lie had ever been. The weeks that followed were the most difficult of our lives. We existed in a strange limbo. The 4 of us, me, Mark, Sarah, and Tom, spoke on the phone almost daily. The calls were awkward, painful, and often ended in tears or frustrated silence. We hired a family therapist who specialized in complex trauma, a neutral party, to help us navigate the minefield we were now living in. The first major decision was the hardest. We had to tell the boys, not just pieces of the story, but the whole, devastating truth. We decided to do it together, all 4 parents, in the therapist's office. I'll never forget the look on Leo's face when we explained that the people who had raised him weren't his biological parents. It was a look of profound betrayal and fear. He recoiled from me when I tried to touch his arm, and the small movement shattered my heart into 1,000,000 pieces. Ryan was quieter, his face pale, his eyes darting between Mark and Tom, trying to process how the man he called Dad wasn't related to him by blood. The therapist, a calm, gentle woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, guided us through the initial storm. She told us there was no rulebook for this. The goal wasn't to find a solution, but to build a new path forward that caused the least amount of harm to the children. The idea of swapping was immediately and permanently taken off the table. You are their parents, she told all four of us. You are the ones who have loved them, raised them, and shaped them. Biology is a fact, but it is not the only fact. Love is also a fact. History is a fact. Slowly, tentatively, we started to build a bridge between our two shattered worlds. The first step was for the boys to meet properly. We arranged a meeting at a neutral space, a bowling alley. It was excruciatingly awkward. Leo and Ryan barely looked at each other, communicating mostly in shrugs and one-word answers. But then Mark, in a moment of inspiration, challenged Tom to a game, and the boys found themselves on the same team. I saw them whisper to each other about which bowling ball to use. It was a tiny crack of light in a universe of darkness. The next step was for us, the parents, to get to know the children we had only known through photographs and stories. Sarah and I started meeting for coffee. At first, it was tense. We were rivals, in a way, bound by the most intimate and painful connection imaginable. But then she started telling me stories about Leo's first words, his favorite bedtime story. And I told her about Ryan's biological grandparents, about the family history he was a part of. We cried together. We were the only two people on Earth who could truly understand the other's specific brand of heartbreak. She wasn't the woman who had my son, she was the woman who loved him. Mark and Tom found their own connection, bonding over sports and a shared, helpless frustration with the situation. They started taking both boys to baseball games together. It was a slow, messy, painful process. There were good days and terrible days. Days when Leo would get angry and yell that we weren't his real family. Days when Ryan would quietly cry and ask Tom if he still loved him. But through it all, we held on to what Dr. Sharma had told us. We had to put the children first. We decided not to uproot them. They would continue to live in the homes they'd always known, with the parents who had raised them. But we would no longer be two separate families. We would become one large, strange, unconventional one. We started spending weekends together. We had joint Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners. It was loud, chaotic, and emotionally exhausting, but it was also beautiful. I watched Leo and Ryan slowly forge a bond. They weren't just two boys caught in a bizarre situation anymore. They were brothers. They had a unique connection that no one else could understand. They shared a history, a biology, and now, a future. About a year after that first devastating email, we threw a joint 13th birthday party for them in the same park where our worlds had first collided. There were 2 cakes, 2 sets of presents, and one big jumbled family. I watched Leo, my son, laughing with his friends, and I watched Ryan, the boy with my jawline and Mark's eyes, talking with his dad, Tom. Then I saw Ryan look over at me and give me a small, shy smile. In that moment, I understood. Mark's anniversary gift hadn't destroyed my family. It had shattered our definition of what a family was, only to rebuild it into something larger, stronger, and more profound. It wasn't about blood or biology. It was about showing up. It was about love in all its messy, complicated, and resilient forms. We were a family born from a mistake, but held together by choice. And as I looked around at all the people I loved, my husband, my son, and this whole new family we had inherited, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the simple, perfect life I had before, but it was real, and it was ours.